Everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, and today we're going to be looking at Pixelborn and how it may actually be making you a worse player. But before we get started, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down in the bottom corner. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most, with this channel being dedicated to the card games that I play. Now, I know what you're thinking, that any amount of testing against another opponent should be good for helping develop both your deck and your play style, and to the extent that more reps will get you more comfortable with your deck, you are correct. But we're actually going to be looking at some subtle differences between the Pixelborn app versus actual competitive Lorcana play. And it's these subtle differences that you're going to need to be watching out for when you're testing online to make sure you don't fall into any of the traps and bad habits that actually could result in you becoming a worse player. So the first thing we want to look at is the formatting for Pixelborn. So Pixelborn is actually a best of one format versus a best of three format, which you find in the regular tournament play. Now, the creator of Pixelborn actually talked about changing it over to a best of three format where you could opt out of the second and third game if you wanted to keep it best of one, but ultimately landed on a kind of hybrid format, which is still best of one, but you can see the colors of the decks that you are playing against before the game started. Now, why this is so important is in the game of Lorcana, mulligans and choices of cards to ink throughout your turns is a huge part of your wins and losses in competitive play, and that decision is based largely against the knowledge of what you're playing against. So in a traditional best of three format, you have little to no information going into your first game, but for games 2 and game 3, if there is a game 3, you should have a good understanding of your opponent's decks and your best strategies within your deck to win. So your best opportunity to mulligan and your best cards to ink throughout that matchup. Now, when you switch that over to a best of one, you're not going to have that additional information. And even with this hybrid format, it's giving you more information than you should have in a one-game series. In all likelihood, you really should not know what your opponent is playing at all in your first game for the match, which again is another opportunity to learn what to keep as far as just an average hand to keep against an open meta. And even then, it's still a bit misleading. Now that they are showing those two colors, more established or well-known decks are going to do a little worse because your opponent's going to have a good idea what they're playing against when they see Ruby and Amethyst flash up on the screen if you're actually testing one of the more competitive Ruby Amethyst builds. And as such, rogue decks are going to be performing a little bit better. If you're playing, let's say, the Amethyst Steel mill deck where you're trying to run your opponent out of cards, they're going to see that those two color combinations and probably think you're playing one of the Amethyst Steel control builds that have been doing well and mulligan accordingly for that. So the new format they've developed is kind of a concession to people who didn't really want to play the best of three format on Pixelborn, but unfortunately it has kind of created its own format that really isn't going to lead you to a whole lot of good experience in competitive tournament play, and it's going to hinder your ability to make those critical decisions whenever you are finding yourself in that high-level tournament play. Another thing that's present in Pixelborn that you do not have in a real-life tournament format is the ladder system that they have in Pixelborn. Now, the goal of the ladder system is to pair people of similar skill together on the simulator so that you're playing people that are the same level of skill that you are, and that the more you play, the more experienced players that you're going to play, so forth and so on. Now, the first issue with this is that the sim doesn't know how good of a player you are. It's using the number of wins that you accumulate to determine how good of a player you are. And this comes with a couple different issues. One, not all good players invest the time it takes to get to their respective spot on the ladder. It takes a lot of games to get to the top of the ladder. It's not something where just skill alone will get it there. You have to commit a lot of time to playing a lot of games and winning a lot of games. And then you have it determining by wins how good of a player you are is also a bit misleading, because you could just be a player who's using the Pixelborn app to test your theoretical decks that you're kind of playing around with to see if they are good enough to take to your local tournament or a big tournament that you're planning on attending. And it doesn't have any way of really rating the quality of your play. So if you have a close game and you lose, it's the same as if you get the doors blown off of you and you lose. If you lose to a great player on the other side versus losing to a bad player on the other side, it doesn't really affect how much you move up and down that ladder. Now, I know what you're going to say. They have a lab zone in Pixelborn to test decks, and they do have that, but people are only using that to test decks. So you're only going to run into people that are in there that are theory crafting as well. They may not necessarily be playing the most competitive deck. They in all likelihood are workshopping decks that are not even all the way finished yet. So it doesn't really make it a great place to see real results for any kind of deck that you may be toying around with. For example, if you wanted to see how well your pet deck was doing against the top tier Ruby Amethyst decks in the format, you're probably not going to encounter a ton of those in the lab section of Pixelborn, because that's just not what the section is intended for and not usually where those players are going to gravitate towards. Now let's say that the ladder was actually working perfectly and that everyone was playing people who were on the same skill level as they were. Well, the reality is that is not who you'll be playing in the real world. If you're at or below average, you need to be playing people that are better than you if you're actually wanting to get a real tournament experience or improve your level of play. If you are just constantly playing average or below average players, then you're not really going to know the real level of competition to expect when you go to a high level tournament. Conversely, if you are one of those like top 100 level players at the top of the ladder, the way the ladder system is set up, it rewards playing it safe. It discourages experimentation, and it allows people to kind of memorize what the other top players favor as far as deck archetypes. You don't have some of the best players of our games experimenting and developing new tech and new strategies, because that learning process is going to come at the expense of whatever ladder rank they have. If they're number one on the ladder, they're going to play a deck that's proven, that's got a high enough win rate against a wide open field, and maybe a couple of counter decks to what other people that they anticipate they're going to play against may be playing as well. And to some extent, that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The information from the Pixelborn sim is made public, so we know what those players are playing, and a lot of people will mimic those results in the top 100 players and take those two tournaments. So that does give you some indication of what you may or may not see there. However, it also does bring that false sense of security that just because those top level players are playing those decks, that those are the best decks in the format, versus them just being the safest way for them to maintain their ladder positions. Lastly, but certainly not least important, is that tournament play for Lorcana is a face-to-face experience. It's not just you staring at a screen, analyzing what's on that screen as far as cards you can play and cards your opponent has played. That is in complete contrast to an in-person face-to-face event. And then it actually affects several aspects of the gameplay. You need to be watching for visual tells from your opponent. Are they playing confidently? Are they playing nervously? Are they tilted? Are they angry at their draws? What is the reaction on key turns of the game? If they're playing red, do they look comfortable going into turn 7? Those are things that you need to be training yourself to look for that you can't really look for in a digital version of the game. Conversely, you also need to be watching for visual tells that you're giving your opponent. You know, do you get angry when things aren't going your way in a game? Can you stay calm in adversity? And can you, to some extent, practice the art of bluffing by looking calm under pressure or by looking distressed when you know you have something wrapped up in your hand? These are all things that you're going to encounter in high-level play, and you need to be constantly working at those aspects while you're play testing. And being able to control your cues and pick up on your opponent's cues can be key to winning at high-level events. I've done this across multiple games, and there is no substitution from being able to practice that in person with a live opponent versus a computer screen where those cues just simply don't exist. So there you guys have it, some of the differences that you're going to encounter if you are playing online with Pixelborn. Now, I do love the tool and I do use it quite a bit myself, but these are things I'm always mindful of when I am playing on the app so that I don't fall into any of these traps that we mentioned in the videos. I would love to hear your all's feedback and thoughts on the video down in the comment section below. And until next time, guys, Hobby Hero.